I was told you need to be accessible all the time. And you need to be answering your partner's email within 5 minutes. You need to be answering your client's email within 10, 20 minutes or whatever it may be. And I think the science has come out that that's not healthy.
Welcome to The Defense Never Rests with Morgan and Akins, your monthly dose of uncommon sense about all things legal and some that are not.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Defense Never Rests. I'm your host, Trisha Baxter. And today we're kind of talking about distractions or how bad they are. And for that, I am bringing on with me my partner, Oliver Brooks. Hey, Oliver, how are you?
Morning. Doing pretty well.
So you're like, when I think of somebody who zones out, you're the person. Like, you're my guy.
Yeah.
Well, in a good way. You're not daydreaming. You're like thinking very critically and deeply.
You got to know who you're working with, right?
So the idea for this episode came from a LinkedIn post that I did that I don't even know that you've read. It got over 55,000 views, which for me is a big deal. Like I was like, all right, well, apparently this resonates with people. And I just want to read it so we can ground this episode in why I wanted to do it. So here it is. And it starts off with me quoting myself. I emailed him over 2 hours ago, no response yet. What the hell? One of the attorneys on my team is habitually late in responding to text, emails, and phone calls. And by habitually late, I mean he doesn't respond immediately, or maybe for hours. It used to drive me batshit crazy until I stopped to ask myself why he did that. When I answered my own question, I gained an enormous amount of clarity. He takes the lead on my complex product liability cases, which requires needing to understand complicated engineering principles, the nuances of a complex area of the law, and the medical treatment and terms associated with catastrophic injuries. His day-to-day is all about cognitively demanding projects. And the only way to achieve that is a distraction-free zone, void of push notifications, a ringing cell phone, or the ding of an email arrival. Once someone experiences a distraction, it can take up to 20 minutes to regain their full mental capacity and return to where they left off. So if I really want elite level lawyering, it needs to be okay for them to tune everything out, even me, even clients. And when I fully understood that, my frustration was replaced with appreciation and respect. What do you think?
That sounds good. It's pretty flattering, I guess. It went from I want to strangle this guy to like a pretty flattering commentary. So I guess that's pretty good.
It is good. And I know you're not on LinkedIn, so I know you weren't reading it, but
I'm on it. I just don't read it. That's all.
You're barely on it. I've tagged you in so many things and you do not respond. So I know that you're not on it, which is totally fine. You know, I have a respect for you in that way. But I think what I had realized was all of what was going on, my frustration was about me and what I was thinking and doing. And it used to frustrate the hell out of me when I'd be like, email you and need information and you wouldn't respond immediately. I used to be like, I get so angry and frustrated. And then I realized, well, that's just me. That's not him. And
there is a strategy to some extent of giving people a moment to digest the question that they've asked you, because, 99% of the time, it's not all that urgent, and I came from a firm before I joined Morgan and Akins, where there was this habitual, we call them fire drills, where all hands on deck, we have a question from a client, and it's something that really almost anyone who either thought about it for 5 minutes or went into the file and looked for 15 or 20 minutes could answer for themselves. But it's, a chain of texts with 15 people involved. It's just a nightmare. Like, why? I mean, what's the statute of limitations? Oh God, it's like, and it used to drive me nuts. And half the time, if you just gave them 10 minutes, 15 minutes, they'd figure it out,
Yeah, and I think that's kind of how I was raised too. If you think about how you were raised in the legal profession, a lot of when I stepped into a management role, I just adopted everything I'd learned. And then I started questioning what I had learned. But the first 15 years, I was just learning what other people were doing. And it was that I was told you need to be accessible all the time. And you need to be answering your partner's email within 5 minutes. You need to be answering your client's email within 10, 20 minutes or whatever it may be. And I think the science has come out that that's not healthy. Like for you to be accessible 24/7, let's just go to extremes here. For you to be accessible 24/7, you have to be dialed in, which means you have to be having your email alerts going on. You have to have your phone. You have to have everything around you. And the science just doesn't support that. So,
and I think that sort of is a reflection of an older time when there wasn't a high level of electronic connectivity. And so the concept was, when we ask you a question, it almost has to be during legitimate business hours, and we should be getting a response. But as many of us who've worked in the defense field know, sometimes you get emails at 11:30 on a Sunday PM, and it's like, do I need to respond to this right now? And I'm guilty of sending those emails, but I try to make it very clear that I don't expect a response immediately. It's just because it's in my head and I don't want it to poof, it's gone,
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of me as well. But you're right, though. Your point about it's kind of inbred in our culture. But before we had the technology there, like when I practiced before BlackBerries came out. I practiced at a time when you stepped away from your computer, you stepped away from email because their technology wasn't there for you to access it 24/7. And then BlackBerries came. I don't know if that was the first technology, but it's the one I remember thinking.
I think Palm. You remember Palm pilots?
Oh, yeah, that's right. I didn't have one of those.
Useless thing.
But BlackBerries, really, you could start. And I initially thought BlackBerries were a godsend because then I wasn't like stressed out. Like you could take your email with you home, and then if something emergency came up, you could answer it right then. That's kind of not what the technology has evolved to. It's evolved to, well, you are accessible, so you should be accessible. Like there's technologies there that if a client wants to email you at 1 a.m., they can get to you. They know they can get to you. So before, if they email you at 1 a.m. or leave a voicemail at 1 a.m.
Or a fax, remember?
Fax. Or a
fax.
Snail mail letter. You remember those, the snail mail letters? Yeah. Do we even send letters anymore?
I don't know. I remember when the faxes, remember when they were like curly? It was like a curl, like some ancient scroll.
Because it was a different kind of paper. It was like a thinner, less structured paper. But so I think, having this discussion is so important. I thought it when I wrote that initial post about inspired by you. And then when I got that reaction, 55,000 views and a ton of comments, and not everyone agreed with me either. There were some people who were like, I'm going to be accessible 24/7 to my clients. What you're saying is BS. I definitely got those comments. It didn't change my mind. I still think you need to be able to walk away and tune people out. And there's, especially for what we do, which is kind of what I want to get into.
And anybody who's, frankly, I think anyone who's saying I'm constantly available at all times, that's just their virtue signaling to their clients and marketing for themselves. I mean, it's not true. No human being can do it. So you don't sleep, okay? You don't take showers. Are you like what was it, LBJ giving dictation while he's sitting on the toilet? Like, come on, man, you're not doing that. You have to be disconnected.
And that's what I said. I think I wrote back. I'm like, when you're on trial, do you say, excuse me, judge, I got a call from a client. I got to go take it. Or if you're in the middle of a deposition, are you dialed into no, you're zoned into that dep. If you're at trial and cross-examining witness, you're zoned into that one single task, because to be otherwise would be malpractice. So,
yeah, I mean, and you end up doing nothing very well when you do it that way.
And I think, and the thing is, I think you have to recognize that, start with the foundation of what we do for a living, which is at times very complicated. And it really goes down to, I read Deep Work, a book by Cal Newport, changed my life on this. It's because what he's saying is so true. And I just want to kind of take some excerpts from that, where he talks about what deep work is, and we do it. We don't do it 10 hours a day every day, but there are parts of our day that involve needing to be really thinking through complex problems. So he defines deep work as professional activities performed in a state of distraction-free concentration that push your cognitive capabilities to their limit. These efforts create new value, improve your skill, and are hard to replicate, which is what we do. Not every day, all day, but if you think about some of the complex cases that we have, especially what your specialty, which is product liability, you know, when a product is involved in an accident with a plaintiff and that plaintiff gets hurt, we have to do a massive deep dive into that product. We have to understand how it works. We have to understand engineering principles. You have to get creative, and you can't do that if you're constantly distracted.
Yeah, and I mean, relatively little of the volume of the work requires that much focus. If I had to estimate, I'd probably ballpark at 20, perhaps as high as 25%. But that portion requires an exponentially greater amount of time and attention, you know, than the rest of it. You know, if you have a flower garden, the orchids and roses take almost all the work. You know, the rest of the stuff just more or less goes on its own. You know, I don't grow flowers, but my wife does. So
I was like, when did you study on flowers?
No, I do the vegetables. She does the flowers. But you know, they're I guess more they're more needy, but you know, that's where most of your value comes from, you know.
It's like the 80-20 rule. You know what I'm talking about, where there's this concept that 80% of your results come from 20% of your effort. Like the part of our cases that yield the most bang for their buck is the 20%, which is a lot of times that cognitively demanding task. You know, if one of the things that we try to do is analyze cases early, and you really have that's hard. That's not always easy to do. So, and if you analyze your cases properly early and you figure out the complexity of what's going on and you make it simple and digestible, then you can figure out where your case is headed. And that's 80% of litigation.
You know, one thing that we have to remember is that most of the time our opponents have had a vastly large amount of time to contemplate these issues. You know, not all the time. Sometimes they get the case at the last minute and they have to make things happen in a very short period of time. But most of the cases that we're working on, plaintiff's counsel had months to figure out his or her angle of attack, what they're going to plead, how they're going to couch this stuff. Do we include negligence along with the strict liability? You know, are we going to emphasize this? Are we going to, you know, make this a warnings case, a guarding case, whatever the case may be? One would assume that if they're going to make money, they're going to have this plan. And I think most of them do. Not all. We have some that it's obvious. They're just write it all down, send it out. You know, it's a, you know, a fairly straightforward case, and there's 400 paragraphs in a complaint. You know, that's the kitchen sink method.
Throw everything against the wall, right?
Yeah, and we have to. There's, you know, and there is some merit, I guess, to the strategy of them doing that, because now we have to sort through it and pick out what they're really going to do with this. But you know, we are working in a relatively curtailed time frame comparatively to what they've done. So, you know, you might want to be effective with how you're doing it, you know.
And not to mention that we bill our clients for our time. So the more efficient we are with it, the lower the bill, the happier they are. You know, we don't
in defense of the devil, the plaintiff's lawyers do bill their clients for their time. It's just a big one at the end, you know.
They get a much bigger check. So I wanted to separate that, like the deep work, you know, that cognitively demanding aspect of our job, which is not all day, from the other stuff, which is kind of shallow work, right? And this is how, Cal Newport defines it. He goes, non-cognitively demanding, logistical style tasks often performed while distracted. These efforts tend to not create much value in the world and are easy to replicate, which I think is true. There's a big chunk of our day. I mean, look, people outside the legal profession maybe think that we're constantly thinking and analyzing, but it's not true. It's a big portion of our day that's administrative or stuff that's not highly complex. And that would be shallow work. And for that, I think you can be connected, you can be kind of distracted.
Yeah, and I typically try and structure that stuff in intentionally, so a great example is like we just had in one of our more difficult multi-party big damages cases, a series of fairly complex motions for summary judgment responses and then replies to those responses. And it's pretty daunting because your opposition is pulling out nuggets or sound bites from depositions and frankly misconstruing a lot of stuff. But
of course,
you've got to pull that stuff out and compare it and make sure that you're on point with your arguments. But afterwards, you're a little bit fried. So why not do something like review the schematics for one of your products that you're looking for a particular type of component in there. You don't need to necessarily know exactly how it works, but you need to be able to pull that page out and take it to your expert and say, explain this to me. So that requires just looking for things. It's basically like shape identification or word identification. It's not really digesting it so much. But it may take you 2 or 3 or 4 hours to go through all of those documents, depending on how many there are. So that's a lower level activity where if an email pops up, you can just jump over to it and respond to it. Or if the phone rings, you can respond to that. Or you can, have a podcast on in the background or something. And not everyone can do things at the same level. And for me, it has to do with being like having some degree of self-realization, what your capabilities and your personal limitations, proclivities, whatever you want to say are. One of my good friends is a marathon runner. I have no idea why a person would want to do something like that, but he's really into it. And he has gotten better and better and better. And now he's classified as elite, in these big marathons. And a large portion of that, I think, has to do with him understanding what his physical capabilities are and setting his pace accordingly. Something that is both fast and manageable. And it's sort of like that with this deep work. If you're a person who can't listen to background music without being distracted, then you're just that person. There's nothing wrong with that. But there are plenty of us who will put on, some like Iron Maiden at 11 and go to work.
Plenty of us, meaning Oliver Brooks, right?
Most of the time I can do that. Some days you're not on like that, and you got to turn it off.
And I think that's the point, though. It's separating the deep work from the shallow work, and then knowing what it takes for you to get into that state of deep work, because it's important. You have to get yourself in a state. You have to do things intentionally to put yourself in a position where you get your brain thinking about really hard stuff. And, if part of your job is that, then doing that exercise of distinguishing between what stuff that I really do need to zone in on and what stuff don't I, deep work versus shallow work. I'm the same way. For me, it's more creativity. Like I only think creatively when I turn everything off, when I step out of my office, go in a different room, get a spot that's quiet, that people aren't going to distract me or call me, email me, or my family or whatever. But then I know that like you said, I can come out of it and balance it with more mundane, reviewing invoices. Like that's a big part of my task. Like it doesn't take cognitively demanding for me to look at an invoice and see if it's right or wrong, or return emails, or, return phone calls. Those aren't cognitively demanding typically, unless it's like a round table with a client or something.
Yeah,
But
and you can kind of tag things and parse them out. So like you're going through your invoices, you might just have two stacks. One stack is these are good to go, and these are like maybe I got to look at these a little bit more closely. I know there's something funky with them, but I'm not going to dive into it right at this moment. Maybe later this afternoon I'll get to it and really figure out why I think they smell funny.
Yeah. Well, and there's some science behind like why when you do deep work, you shouldn't be doing the shallow work either. You shouldn't be having the distractions. And I just want to throw some things at you and get your opinion on that. So some of the science stuff, and I don't always get the science. I just know there's a science behind it. So here's some of the things. Constant interruptions can have the same effect as the loss of night's sleep. Go figure. Those distracted by emails and phone calls saw a 10-point fall in their IQ. For every distraction, like a phone checking or an email checking, it can take the brain 3 to 5 minutes to get back on track. And frequent distractions create a hyper alert state that activates adrenaline and cortisol production, which is a stress indicator.
Yeah, maybe. I just find it more difficult. That's all.
You're like, I don't want to care about complicating with science. I just know it's difficult.
No, I mean, I do know that distractions are a huge thing. In my prior firm, I did a lot of auto crashworthiness stuff, and we would get these emails from manufacturers and from, our various engineering firms that we would hire as experts, and they would have studies in them. And one of the ones that I really remember is that, and everyone knows this now, but 10 years ago it wasn't as big of a thing, is that like distracted driving is a huge cause of accidents, right? Because believe it or not, driving it's not a true deep dive, but it's much deeper than you would actually think it is. You're taking in a lot of information and you are processing it, and you're doing it not necessarily even aware that you're doing all of it, but you become so good at it that you are doing it. And being distracted is really difficult to manage that. And one of the most interesting studies that I saw, I think it might have been in Sweden, where they found that hands-free talking on a phone was equally distracting as talking with the phone, and was almost equally distracting as texting. The only difference was your eyes are not on the phone while you're texting, while you're, with hands free. So, and the point is that the person you're speaking with is not in the same environment as you. They're not experiencing the same things as you, and you are totally divorcing your brain from what it is that you're doing. So I think there's a lot of parallels with, your work in your office and your deep dive with, you're over here wrestling with this significant legal issue in motions practice, and somebody's calling you from a provider who's like, your $220 bill for the deposition in this case is 6 days overdue. And I'm like, okay, thanks. We'll get back to you, maybe. It totally destroys everything. I mean, and another, to go back to my buddy, the marathon runner, if he gets 3/4 of the way through the race and takes a break, do you think he's going to ever start again?
And that's the problem. Like if you are in that zone, and I correlate a lot to writing, because I think that's a lot of our cognitively demanding stuff is the writing. When we sit down and write out, the act of writing forces us to think through cases and issues and ways that just sitting there thinking wouldn't. So it's about writing. So if you're in the zone of writing and you're whatever writing that may be, and then you stop, and then you take that 5 to 10 minute phone call, and then you come back, it takes you 5 to 10 minutes to get back in that state again. And then you're 20 minutes or 25 minutes away from where you were. And then you're like, are you as productive? Or can you easily get back into that state where you have that flow, or you have that energy, where you have that creativity? I don't think you can. And maybe you do, like maybe the marathon runner stops. Maybe you then pivot to something else.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you want your best time, you're not going to be taking breaks in the middle of the race. And if you are, it means that you have not, again, I'm kind of talking out of my ass here because I never run a marathon, but like I think if you have to take breaks, it probably means that you haven't set your pace correctly. And, again, I don't know what I'm talking about, but it seems to me that you're never going to set many records when you're not moving. And getting in that zone and just continuing with it makes sense. And particularly with writing, your work product at the end is better because it's cohesive and it makes sense. Again, I think it's mostly to do with your self-realization. What can you personally tolerate? What do you do best? And going with it. I mean, if you do your best work in the shower, get a waterproof laptop. If you do your best work writing on paper, write it out. I mean,
well, how do you and like I had mentioned in that post, you do a lot of the complicated product set liability stuff. And I think the hardest thing that I see you do is when you write up an evaluation.
Yeah.
I think that is so hard. So many people have in their head what a case is worth, whether it's a good or bad case, and what should happen to the case. But then when you memorialize that on paper in a way that a client understands, so that you're not talking to a group of Mensa, high IQ, intellectuals. You're talking to the everyday person.
Easy. Our clients are all Mensa, high-powered intellectuals. Okay.
Sorry, my bad. But to put it to take those principles and write it in a way that people just get, that's really hard. That's really hard. You do it better than anybody else. I think you even do it better than me. I think your writing on evaluating cases is better than mine. When I read your stuff, I'm like,
it is. I know.
Yeah, right. See, I've done some self-realization too. I know my strengths and weaknesses, but how do you get to the point where you get that finished product?
Well, I mean, more often than not these days, the framework of the evaluation comes to me from one of the associates. And when I say a framework, it's a skeleton. There's no meat. There's no organs. There's no skin. No hair. There's certainly not a well-tailored suit put on it. It's just a framework, and then I start gluing the pieces onto it, and I usually remold it at least twice before it's done. And that's not just in professional work. I mean, you have to hear what the hell it is that's coming out of your own mouth, because you might be thinking you're sending a certain message and you are not. You're saying something completely different, from what you're intending to communicate. And most of the time, the ramification of that is not all that big. Maybe you get in a fight with your spouse or your kid or something like that over that, and you guys get over it. But when you're dealing with basically somebody else's money and exposure to that money, you don't want that to come out a year later and be like, remember when you said right here, there's no chance that this particular argument will ever hold water. Well, now that's their main argument, and you're telling me we got to pay a lot because of it. Well, what I meant was, it seems unlikely, given the information that we have at hand, that that's the way it's going to go. Well, that's not what you said. Right here, black and white. So to me, it's about putting down your thoughts, refining those thoughts, and then viewing them as though they're not your thoughts, viewing them as I don't mean to be critically viewing them. That's kind of a lame way of explaining it. It's more like viewing it as somebody who doesn't know the mindset of the reader, or of the writer, excuse me. I've already screwed myself up.
I followed you. I'm with you.
So, and it takes a lot of time. I mean, just yesterday, on a relatively simple case, I reformed an evaluation of a case that, I spent like 4.5, 5 hours on it, and it's not that complicated of a case. It's really not. The problem is, what angle are they going to take with this? Which seems most likely? Where do we focus our efforts? And it's even more complicated because it doesn't have a huge value. And I don't want to just do a full-on, assault on the beaches at Normandy, because the value just isn't there to do that. It's not chump change, but it's not, an 8-figure or even a 7-figure or really even a mid 6 figures case, But paring that down and trimming it and streamlining it is difficult. These may be read by people who don't know anything. We have a couple of cases where the person managing the legal aspects of the manufacturer has no legal understanding of anything. Some of them are very open about that and accepting, and some not so much, but you have to really explain it to them in a way that they understand what the risk is, what the cost is going to be, and what the exposure is if things go wrong. It sounds much more simple than it actually is.
But that's the point, though. It's taking those complex principles and boiling it down to something simple, which is the cognitively demanding task, right? It's not, you have to be very aware of how you're communicating. You don't have 20 pages to communicate what you want. You don't have 20 pages to take your client through this journey of your thought process. You have to do it you have to focus on brevity and clarity and being very concise. And that's hard because I think our lawyer brains are like, let me just dump and vomit all this information on the paper. And the cognitively demanding deep work stuff, I think, is how you're communicating it.
Well, you can do the vomit. You're just going to have to clean it up. I mean, like, you can do that. And that's some people's way of doing it, is get it all out and then start wiping off the things that don't really matter until you're left with what you have. I don't really do it that way, but I know that some people do. And your choice of words is important. I mean, that sometimes is the most, it's so stupid, but it's like, do I use, a certain or should or would or could or may or shall? You can't get too wrapped up in it, but it drives me nuts when people use weird words that, like, I have to stop and think about what it means, and it makes me really mad when I get here's a great example, the word as, when what they mean is because it can mean. I brought this to the attention of one of our associates. This sentence says, it was something like, I'm paraphrasing, the fire started as the battery malfunctioned. Well, does that mean the fire started because the battery malfunctioned, or does that mean the fire started contemporaneously with the battery malfunctioning? I hate that. And it's ruined my ability to understand what you're trying to say to me, because now that's all I can think about.
I think that's funny. That's funny. I mean, that's picky. Like that, I'll be honest, that's picky. I get your point, but yeah. I mean, it does need, clarity is important.
And by the way, I used the battery thing not because of the case. That's just what I was working on all day yesterday. That came to my mind. It was,
well, go ahead.
No, I mean it's about the clarity of communication. So you're never gonna get there if you're typing and texting and listening to Joe Rogan in the background. I mean, you gotta turn that off for the difficult stuff. But at the end of the day, if you need, you got an hour's worth of, relatively simple task, go ahead. You can listen to Rogan.
So how do you do it? So like you sat down 4 or 5 hours yesterday or whenever it was, kind of putting together that evaluation to the client, what you thought was best for the case. Do you have a process to do that? Do you shut everything down? What do you do?
I open my dual screens and I minimize Outlook, so I'm not seeing it. And
but do you have that notification that pops up? Does it how you have that little box in the bottom corner?
It does. And you know what? I'm good at ignoring it. I mean, I'm sure there's a way to turn that off so that you don't get the pop-up. But I'm good at ignoring it. My phone doesn't give me any kind of like silly ding or buzz whenever I get a text or an email or something, But I just got back from this trip where we went, way off grid on this 4-wheel drive trip. And then when we got into civilization, my two friends, their phones it was ridiculous. This like series of obnoxious dings, charms, buzzes, and it went on for like 15 minutes, bing, bzz, bing, bing, bing. And I'm like, and the thing is, I just looked at one of them and I just go, you're not that important. None of this is really all that important. Maybe 1 or 2 of those was like from someone you care about. The rest is like nonsense.
So do you have your text notifications turned off? Do you have any notifications on your phone turned on?
When I get a text, it gives me an icon at the top corner, but it just stays. It doesn't say like a number of how many. It doesn't flash. It doesn't buzz. It just lets me know that there is a text there. And that's not on that's not on the, I guess you call it the idle screen, you just push the power, it's not power, but you turn the screen off. That's not on there. If the screen is on, I can tell that there's a text message waiting or an email waiting, but it doesn't tell me like you have 37 emails waiting.
But so if I were to text you right now, let's say your phone's in another room, would you know that I'm texting you?
No.
What about calling you? If I called you right now?
Well, right now the ringer is set on just to vibrate. So if it wasn't, within a couple feet of me, I wouldn't know.
What about email? Do you get a noise notification that you have an email?
No, Trish, if that happened, I would never sleep. I would never eat, or go to the bathroom. It was just because I get a lot of emails and most of it I don't really need to pay attention to. The overwhelming majority of it is I'm copied on something that, okay, I get it. I need to be copied on it, but I don't really need, that's low level, shallow work,
Emails, yeah?
Yeah, mostly. Some of them, you just have to know which ones to put that little red flag next to go back and do the deep work on. But I don't get these little dingy poppy, vibratey things. And I absolutely refuse to wear a smartwatch. I'm not some sort of bear that's been captured and tagged and put back into the wilderness, or they're monitoring where it goes and what it does. And I'm just not doing it. And I have friends who work for firms who give them a considerable discount on like health insurance for wearing one. Not me. You guys would probably raise my health insurance for it. Not doing.
Are you on social media?
No. I mean, I have a Facebook account that says absolutely nothing about me, and it's there so that I can look at various witnesses or plaintiffs and stuff like that, just to see, are they up posting something about this issue. But I don't do it. This is maybe a topic for another podcast, but I find it to be extraordinarily stressful, and it's this odd combination of disinteresting and slightly addictive. You look at it and you're like, this weird voyeuristic, peering into people's windows, except you're not really seeing what they're doing. You're seeing a staged event, and I don't find it to be. I know this is gonna end up on some social media, so it's kind of an odd commentary, but it if you're using it to for business or something, I get it, but I have zero interest, less than zero, negative interest in personal social media involvement. I missed the boat totally with that one.
Well, it's so funny because we are going to do another podcast on that, by the way, because I am currently reading a book, again, by Cal Newport called Digital Minimalism. And in that is that concept, how bad social media is. And I'm like, my whole marketing strategy is social media. But he says digital minimalism is really how you define it. It doesn't mean you have to be off everything. You just have to be very strategic. If you're using it as a tool and very strategic, then it can be useful. But that's a podcast for another day. But I do want to rattle off some stuff and tell me, and this is my definition I want a yes or no from you. And this is my definition of yes or no. If you've been on it personally in the past month, not for work, but personally, okay? Or if you're not on it, just say no, all right? So Facebook, yeah. Well, let me go. Facebook, are you on it personally?
No.
Instagram?
No.
Snapchat?
No.
Twitter?
No.
LinkedIn?
No.
I don't even know what else. What other ones are there?
Tumblr.
Tumblr. See, I don't even know anymore. Tumblr.
I heard that on NPR one day, so I think that's a thing. No, I just none personally. I went on Facebook the other day to look for a witness, but that was perhaps 5 minutes. I couldn't find him, and I got sick of it, and I turned it off. So,
what about the internet for searching for random things besides
I'm on
work?
that all the time. All the time.
So would you categorize yourself as an internet junkie?
No, but example, I decided, this is so silly. I decided I wanted to buy a new flashlight, and I'm sick of buying the cheapy ones that are like $15 or $20 and they last 3 months and they're done. And they don't really work all that well. They're not very durable. So I'm like, I'm going to buy a real high dollar flashlight. And so I went down this rabbit hole of high dollar flashlights. And by the way, there's an entire subculture of people who collect expensive flashlights.
Really?
Oh yeah. And they range in price to numbers that would probably blow your mind. I mean, would you ever spend $700 on a flashlight?
Oh, hell no.
No, neither would I. But at the same time, I want something that's going to work. And so now I'm like, wow, if you're going to be into the above $100 for a flashlight, you better make sure you get one that's worth it. So then I start looking. I probably did 10 hours of flashlight research, and it's just, and why? It's stupid.
Did you get a good result, or did you buy the Mac Daddy of flashlights?
I did not, because I was like, this is kind of stupid. In the end, I was like, this is just too much, But I do that all the time. I'm into four-wheel drive trucks, and there's a whole culture of that, and then there's subcultures of that, and there's we call them the mall crawlers, where it's got gigantic tires, it's lifted, it's got $40,000 worth of junk on it, and spotless clean, never seen dirt. There's that subculture. Then there's the minimalist. We're just going to go and do it. And then there's the overland crew who I think they're largely trust fund people who have nothing better to do. And they, and it's fascinating to get into that stuff. But in the end, I usually just go, now I learned it.
Well, let me rattle off just maybe one, maybe two more, because then I have a question on the back of it. What about television? Do you watch television?
It depends on what you define as TV. So regular network TV, virtually zero. for like cable TV, we have all these channels, and I think if you were to track what I'm watching, it's like four of them. And honestly, most of it is, I never watched the news until the Corona pandemic, and every morning I flip it on to see the stats of how many people have got it, how many people are dying, and that sort of thing.
Do you feel like you're missing out by not being tuned in to social media or television or whatever it may be?
No.
Do you feel like you're missing out?
No. You guys are in the Matrix, man. I'm hanging out with Lawrence Fishburne, like, I totally do not need to take the blue pill. It's largely an artificial world. I don't mean to shit on every aspect of it, because clearly there is some value. I mean, if there is a problem in your neighborhood, power lines are down on this road, you might have a Facebook or something that's for your neighborhood, and they're like, keep your kids off of Tamarack Court, there's a problem. We're going to have a social distanced barbecue if you guys want to come. That's one thing. But the notion that I'm missing out on watching people's avatars of their lives is, to me, it's just absurd. I mean, come on, like, people looking at, like, and I'm just going to come out and say it, there's a particular young female billionaire who made a makeup line, who was on her television show, and people are like, she's a self-made billionaire. I was like, no, this is an image. And, if she were a self-made billionaire, she wouldn't have time to be gallivanting all over the world, getting her picture taken and hanging out with her sisters on these shows. She would be like Elon Musk, working her ass off.
Well, how do you know she's not working her ass off? Elon Musk is maybe not on a reality show, but he's out there.
Yeah, but he's not spending the amount of time that these people are in building an image. She and I actually forget. I know her name now that I'm thinking about it, but like she's like the Ronald McDonald of McDonald's. Like, Ronald McDonald didn't build this enterprise. He was, I think they cut him out because he's kind of creepy, but he was the face of McDonald's, Colonel Sanders may have been an original founder, but now who we see on TV as Colonel Sanders, it's just a image,
I did a digital detox about 2 years ago where I turned all my notifications off. I don't get anything. So I'm horrible at texting because I don't get notifications. And like, I have to go into my phone and look at my text to see if I got any, but I just don't. So I turned all my notifications off. I turned my email notification off. We got rid of cable. I'm like, what is the point of having cable? So we only have like a Roku, and we have certain apps that we, purposely watch certain shows, but it's mostly like through Netflix or whatever. But we don't have the TV on all day. It's just we're very deliberate. And when I did that, I also, at the same time, read the book Deep Work, and he talks about carving out time, scheduling time for the hard stuff. And I do that now, and I've been doing that for quite some time, and mine's morning. Like, yours is at night. But when I get up in the morning, I have a morning routine, and I don't check email until like 9 or 9:30, but I've been up since 5:45 or 6. I've stopped checking all my social media stuff. I'm like, that it waits. And I focus on the big thing that I need to do, which right now is like, I'm creating a webinar for clients. I'm actually writing a chapter of a book. And this morning when I got up, before I picked up my phone, before I opened my email, I started writing my chapter, because I know that if I dial into email or if I look at social media, I'm going to get sucked in. So I need to separate that and create my own time. But that's my process. If I don't set time aside for the creative, for the things that I need to think really hard about or creatively about, it's not going to happen.
And concentration itself takes practice. As I know you meditate, but like, getting to a point of actual true meditation is not something that you can just sit down and do.
Mm-mm.
It takes a long time.
I did it consistently for several years, and I got to that point where I could clear my head, but it took years. And then I stopped, and I stopped for about a year to 2 years, and now I'm back at it. I'm about 2 straight months into meditating every day, and I'm starting just to feel a little bit of what I felt before. But there's so many thoughts in my head, but I know that every day I show up for it, every day I do I'm stepping closer to my goal, which is not that you have a goal in meditation, but I want to clear my mind. And I know what that feels like, to be thinking of nothing. And it's beautiful. You can feel energy in your body when that happens. And I'm so not there yet. I know I will, because I'm committed to consistently doing it every day. I think one of our clients who runs triathlons, who's in tip-top shape, you know who I'm talking about. I won't mention him because he's not a social media guy or a podcast.
Great set of hair. Great set of hair.
But he's not on social media. And I remember asking him once, I'm like, are you on social media? He looked at me like I was a devil. Like, why would I do that? Like, why would I be on Facebook? Like, he is so focused though. He's so focused. And when he's with you, he's dialed into you. So we used to attend a lot of mediations together. The associates handle more of them now, but when we were in it together, he wasn't buried in his phone. He was very much dialed into what was going on that day, or to our conversation, or even when I've gone out to dinner with him or drinks or whatever it may be, he doesn't have his phone sitting next to him. And I always admired that about him. And he's been doing this way before any of the science came out, that, the distraction science came out. But I always admired him for that, because he never felt like he was missing out. He never felt the need to be pulled into this online community or pulled into something that was more, I don't want to say shallow, just not high level, I guess. So I remember I talked to you about this podcast. I'm like, I would love to get him on the podcast, but there's no way he's coming on. Like, he's just not a public guy. But
this fear of missing out, I don't really understand it. I mean, I want you to think about a time that you were doing some work and you were eating at the same time, and you're looking at the work and you're eating, and you're looking at the work and you're eating, and you reach into the bowl of pretzels or whatever it might be, and you're like, I ate them all, and you didn't enjoy even 1/10 of 1 second of eating those things. They were just gone. So fear of missing out, well, there's stuff right here in front of you that you're missing out on by reaching into the ether for something that's not even real. I mean, if you talk about fear of missing out, you're missing out on what's right here.
Yeah. I think it's a good way to look at it, is being too tied to the external, that you do miss some of the really high quality things in life, whether it's laughing with your children or your wife or whatever your hobby may be. But
similarly, if a client or a spouse or a friend catches you in a time when you're not dialed in, but they want you to be dialed in, they stop you in the hall, or you by chance pick up the phone or whatever, I think it's important to be able to say, I'm not dialed in right now. I will get back to you fairly soon, but right now is just a bad time. Because how many times have you talked to one of your friends in your life and they were just nasty to you on the phone, and you didn't realize they're sitting in the ER because their kid's sick or something? They could just say, look, I got my hands full. We got to talk another time. And that would be much better than like, why'd you call me an asshole? Like, I just called you for, a minute. So
yeah, I had that experience with my husband, like just last week.
He called you an asshole? That's
not no, he did not call me an asshole, but the reverse of it, I think I said something.
We have a talk, Tom.
But no, we had a fight. And well, it didn't start out as a fight. It was me having a conversation with him about something that was really personal and vulnerable. And I was sharing some information that was like vulnerable. So, and I knew he wasn't paying attention. Like, I knew instantly. And I said, all right, hold on. Is this a bad time? If you aren't dialed in, I don't think I said that word, but if you aren't dialed into our conversation right now, I can pause and we can come back to it. He's like, no. I'm listening. And then he continued on to do whatever he was doing. And I could tell again, he wasn't listening and got really pissed. So after we had some choice words, or I had some choice words, and we calmed down, we came back and I said, look, if there is a time where you need to do something else and I'm talking to you about something and you just don't have that space to listen to me, just tell me, Trisha, right now, not a good time. I think that's an example of it.
You have to be able to say that. I mean, because otherwise you end up, not committing the brain power that the other person expects you to, and there can be friction because of it. So, I just look at it as it's a natural limitation. You just say, like, look, we're going to have to do this another time. I'd rather say that than to give you less than what you need at this moment.
Well, I know we have to wrap this up, so I wanted to get to a couple final thoughts. One is, I think the idea of this episode, which was that original post that I did on LinkedIn, and this concept that as lawyers or people that have really high functioning jobs, that they have to be available 24/7. I think we need to rid that. And if you're in a job where your boss expects you to do that, you need to have a talk with them. You need to be like, look, on this today, I'm tuning out for the next 3 to 4 hours, or whatever your process may be. I am turning off email. I'm turning off notifications. I'm putting my phone away because I need to do X, Y, and Z. And that needs to be okay. And that means that if the boss in those 3 to 4 hours cannot get in touch with that person, or if a client can't get in touch with that person, that there's no ramifications for that. We need to have that kind of culture that people know that it's okay and safe to tune out. What do you think about that?
No, I think it's super important. And, I think it's a reflection of some of the old style law firms were very middle heavy with all these mid-level partners, who may not know anything about these cases. And the rainmaker is like, what's going on with this? I just got a call. And the mid-level one's going, I probably should know if plaintiff has been deposed, so then they're emailing, calling, texting the associate who knows all of it. And it's a fire drill. We got to get back to this client with this. I bought some time. I told him I had to, run to the restroom or something, but we need an answer, and that, I think, in and of itself is sort of a root problem that causes this sort of stuff. But if you can somehow get away from that, that's important. We don't have a lot of this mid-level nonsense of of people who don't know anything about the case, but it's very important to be able to do that stuff without fear that you're going to get smacked by the boss. Like, where were you?
Yeah.
Well, I was doing work for cases that are making you money. So,
well, I think that's the takeaway here is if you're in that kind of culture, I mean, if you can't change, or if you can't have a conversation with your boss about it, I'd get out of it. You need to find something a little bit healthier. But I think that's the takeaway here is you need to recognize that time is valuable. And it probably is what separates you from being an elite lawyer versus an average Joe Schmo lawyer, is that time to really think about whatever problem or issues in front of you. And the only way to get that time is to put yourself in a distraction-free zone and to tune out. So make sure you guys do that. And if you have any questions, email Oliver. He'll tell you how to do it.
And eventually I'll get back to you.
Well, just a couple questions for you. Are you a big reader? Do you read a lot?
Not as much for pleasure as I used to, mostly because during work we're actually reading quite a lot. Mm-hmm. And my eyes get physically sick of reading. I read a couple magazines, but magazine writing tends to be fairly pedestrian. I went back and I read some of the old books from high school that I never really fully digested, like some old Hemingway and stuff like that. And it's I'm glad that I did. I went back and read some of the old Norse mythology that I learned in school but didn't understand, and I'm glad that I did. I mean, there's stuff in like Game of Thrones that was pirated directly from, 5,000-year-old Norse myths, the sagas, But no, not a ton of reading for pleasure. I just don't. A lot of instructional YouTubes. Yeah, it's mostly that, documentaries.
What's your favorite
shows.
documentary right now?
There's a new series that I started on Netflix called Most Wanted, where they are tracking these like notorious criminals. Like the one I just watched, and I can't remember the guy's name, but he was the financier of the genocide in Rwanda, and they tracked him, and then they had him, and then the Swiss let him go, and they tracked him again. Scotland Yard and Interpol's after him, and 23 years later they actually caught him. So that's a pretty cool, and they're like hour-long snippets or whatever, and they distill 23 years into 1 hour.
Yeah, I'm a big documentary freak. I love them. If I'm going to sit down and watch TV, that's my go-to. I love like The Last Dance. I think just talk about mindset and seeing what, Michael Jordan and Phil Jackson, how they approached things. Fascinating.
Yeah.
And then I also, we're doing right now Explained. Have you seen that yet? Which is awesome. It's like 14 to 16 minute episodes of one topic that they explain.
Yeah, I think I've seen one or two of them, like the space race explained.
Mm-hmm.
I think I saw, that one. Which it's interesting because I've actually read in college. I read an awful lot about the space race and its ties to the Cold War and stuff like that. And it's interesting, but I kind of felt like they left out huge pieces of it.
If you guys are looking for a book recommendation, Deep Work by Cal Newport, it really solidifies this concept, probably even better than Oliver and I ever could. I actually reached out to him to see if he'd come on. Surprisingly, I didn't get a response. Go figure. Yeah. But he tells you the science behind why it's important, and then he tells you how to do it. So I love that book. Pick up that book. Also, if you like what you hear, please hit that subscribe button. Give us a 5-star rating, hit that review, whatever dings and bells that you're on, please hit it. I would love it. And Oliver, thanks for coming on. I could chat with you all day. I think we've already run long, but I could chat with you all day. We have such different perspectives that I love getting into your brain. It fascinates me. So thanks for coming on. All right. Until next time, guys, have an awesome one. We will see you next on the Defense Never Rest.